Hi everyone. So now we move to knight f3 d6. A move, well, we are talking about d4, main Sicilian, e d4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3. This position, well, the two main systems after second d6 are the rouser, knight c6. Well, obviously you can also get it via the second knight c6 move order, but maybe I would advise you to go via second d6 move order because, as I've already mentioned before, the anti-Sicilians are maybe more favorable for black after d6 than after knight c6. But anyways, yeah. So most of the time, players who play an rouser, they start with second d6, and at the end we will investigate I would say the main system, which is a6, Najdorf. Maybe I would go as far as saying that maybe the most reliable Sicilian for black, even though, of course, there are many playable systems, but a6 is very serious and probably the main. I can probably consider it as a main Sicilian. But for now, I would like to show you the sidelines for black in this position. So all moves, all other moves on knight c6 and a6, and then the dragon variation. So let's start with sidelines. Here there are no really good sidelines. Of course, again, you can play e6 here. This leads to Scheveningen. We have already checked it, and my advice was g4, very, very unpleasant move. And I think that according to the modern state of theory, white seems to have an advantage here. So then what are the other options? e5. e5 is not, I cannot recommend this move here because there is very unpleasant bishop b5 check. As you will see after a6 in Najdorf, e5 is very often played, but here bishop b5 check is, well, it's just better for white. So for instance, if bishop d7, then you simply change the bishops, come back to e2, and this d5 square is weak, and white is simply positionally much better. And after knight bd7, white also gains a considerable advantage, playing knight f5, a6, bishop a4, b5, bishop b3, knight c5, the d6 pawn was hanging, and now bishop g5, and then occupying the d5 square, and with a considerable advantage. So e5 is just better for white. Then there is a very strange move, knight bd7. Well, actually doesn't make sense, frankly, because well, it's just knight is committing too early to d7, and in many variations it has to go to c6. So finally black will choose this or that setup anyway with e6, a6, g6, but then it just simply the knight is too early on d7. So basically every system white chooses will lead to a favorable favorable version of one of the Sicilians. Let's say bishop e2. The knight on d7 is a bit too early. Bishop e3 is a good move. Also not quite clear why black already put the knight there, but maybe the most straightforward is just g4. Now white has this opportunity to play g4, h6, h4, and again in the style of Carey's attack, just trying to go rook g1, g5, simply better for white. So no point to play knight bd7 also. There is another move, bishop d7, which actually from time to time is played. Even Magnus Carlsen played it once, well, only in rapid chess against Vasiela Graf. There is a certain point, it's not too bad, but obviously it cannot equalize also. White has quite a number of interesting choices. Again, basically it pretty much depends on what system you like to play with white. It's hard to go wrong because almost any move for white gives chances for opening advantage. So you can of course play bishop c4 if you play bishop c4 system, and it's also a slightly better version for white than usual. Then f3 is also a good move, just trying to play bishop e3. Then black's idea, as I understand here, is to play e5, knight b3, bishop e7, and then bishop e3, let's say castle queen d2, and now maybe a5. So like this, at least, it's a very typical play for knight dwarf. And here black made economy on a6 move, so played a5 immediately, and after a4, knight a6, maybe it's actually quite playable for black, even though still I'm not completely sure it's enough to equalize, but at least that's the idea. Bishop e2 is also a good move if you like to play classical systems with bishop e2 against Sicilians. So now, let's say there is an option to play e5, but probably white is better here. Knight b5, bishop c6, bishop g5, a6, now take on f6, forcing black to take with a pawn, knight a3, and f5, bishop f3. Also, it looks like a better version of a typical Sveshnikov variation, and white is also better here. Maybe after bishop e2, black's best is to play knight c6, bishop e3, and now let's say e6. Again, it's a bit too early, the bishop is on d7, so white maybe has more chances to fight for advantage even after short castle. Also there are ideas g4, but that is at least not too bad for black, it's perfectly playable. I think that bishop g5 move, again, if you are playing main rouser with bishop g5, because otherwise probably you shouldn't play bishop g5, because then black can actually play knight c6, which would transpose to rouser systems, which will be considered during our next two lessons. But then most of the time, black is just starting with knight c6, not playing bishop d7. And anyways, after knight c6, bishop g5 is by far the most popular move against rouser. So usually what black is trying to do here is to play e6. This move order, well, the idea is that in case of queen d2, now black already has h6. Here, and after bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, with a knight on c6 instead of bishop on d7. Here white just playing knight db5, lone castle, and simply black is losing the pawn on d6. Here, after knight db5, black can take on b5, and actually the pawn is not lost on c6. After bishop takes b5, knight c6, this position is maybe still slightly favorable for white. I still like white here, something like that. Not quite sure black managed to equalize, but at least, again, it's not too bad. To me, I also believe that knight db5 here is very unpleasant option, because now what? If bishop c6, bishop takes f6, gf6, queen h5 is a6, knight d4, and the white has a very, very good version of rouser. So, those positions we will study later, and they're not easy for black anyways, but here probably black bishop will come back to d7, and then white is, well, at least a tempi up, so should be just better for white. So black's usually trying to take on b5 here, bishop takes b5, knight c6. It doesn't look very good, frankly, black's position, not quite clear why black just gave up his bishop. But it's not as bad as it looks, frankly, because, well, queen f3 is a very direct move. Now, this game, by the way, e5, d5, the game Vashila Graf Magnus Carlsen actually went like this, king f8, and this position is, I believe, better for white, but in fact, Vashila Graf even lost it with white, but again, it was just 15 plus 10 time control. I believe that white still is considerably has a very pleasant plus after rook d1, queen c8, queen f3. Rook d1 is quite important, with the idea that after black is playing h6, and then white can come back to c1, protecting the b2 square, and rook is already active on d1. And okay, black will slowly manage to get his king into the game, rook, but still the pawn structure is in white's favor, and it's nothing too dramatic for black, maybe playable, but better for white, I believe. But I also can advise you a very simple move instead of queen f3, queen e2. I think it's simple and very nice. Bishop e7, lone castle, queen c7, let's say f4, and white has a very nice Sicilian, very, very nice. Computer is assessing this position as 0-5, 0-6 for white, so it's playable for black. Again, as a surprise weapon, maybe it can be played with black, but in general, the problem of such surprise weapons like bishop d7 is that there is there's almost no way for white to go wrong. That's a problem, that almost any system he plays, he will end up in a kind of decent opening position. And if white knows what to do against bishop d7, he'll probably just get a nice plus out of the opening, like in this position we are seeing now on the board. So all in all, not such a great system, but better than the previous two moves, e5, knight bd7. So okay, maybe somebody can just have it in his repertoire for blitz games or rapid chess, just to surprise the opponent. But yeah, definitely not something which would worry white in this position. So now let's move to the main subject of today's lesson, which is a dragon variation, g6. Why it's called dragon? Because there are some people with a lot of imagination, and they found this setup of pawns d6, g6 visually, as at least was explained to me when I was a kid. Maybe it was just to entertain me, but that it reminds very much the dragon for some reason. Doesn't actually remind it to me, this pawn structure with d6, e7, f7, g6, h7, that it's visually like a dragon, and pawns a7, b7 is a dragon tail. Well, I don't have such a great imagination, so I don't find it, but all in all, I don't find why it reminds a dragon, but all in all, maybe some of you will understand that that it really looks like a dragon. Anyways, dragon, okay, why not dragon? So g6. Well, this system is kind of interesting because I think that it's very popular on the lower level, let's say amateur level, club level. Then the higher it gets, the level of you and your opponents, obviously, then less and less popular it becomes. And actually on the top level, very top level, it almost disappeared from tournament practice nowadays. Because why? Because objectively it's very dangerous system. If white knows theory well, and obviously on the top level that is usually the case, then black really is actually in danger to practically to lose without a fight if white is extremely well prepared. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying that it's losing this dragon. No, of course not. I wouldn't even say that it's totally refuted. But the problem is that white has quite a number of systems in the main line. And practically all of those systems are quite dangerous. So black has to know a lot of theory. Of course, in case if white also knows a lot of theory, otherwise it's definitely playable for black. And then almost against any system, there is no guarantee that your opponent will not come up with some computer novelty, you will not manage to find the best. And quite often the only moves, few only moves to get a normal position, and it's easy to lose. And also on top of that, objectively, black is finding hard time to equalize in a couple of main lines. But again, in this system, in Dragon, of course, the opening preparation is very important. I mean, what is good about this system? There is one good news and one bad news for black here. Let's start with good news. The good news is that, in my opinion, there is only one setup for white which can really seriously give chances for opening advantage. That is quite actually rare for Sicilians, because most of the time white has quite a number of different setups and all of them are quite venomous. Here I believe that most of the setups are actually not dangerous for black. This is good news. Now the bad news comes that this setup is actually really dangerous, much more than in many other Sicilians. I mean, this setup is really serious. So let's first check the, not so dangerous, the setups G3, well, most of the Sicilians, as you've already seen, G3 is not too dangerous. Yeah, and actually the G3 system, maybe only against Paulsen, it actually, well, it's not easy for black to equalize. Against most of other systems, G3 is usually harmless, and in Dragon the same story. After bishop G7, bishop G2, here it's even better version that the knight is still not on C6, because then white would be threatening sometimes knight takes c6, b takes c6, e5. Here black can just castle, knight c6. Now taking on c6 and playing e5 is totally harmless at best, d5 simply. So, and actually it's not easy to know what to do with this knight. If bishop e3, knight g4 comes, then okay, knight b3, I think the simplest is bishop g4 here, and black is at least equal. I mean, it's just very nice. Bishop on g7 is very active potentially. Normally knight d2 is played, and I think we already considered this position. Rook b8. I recommend you to play here a4, e6, then followed by b5. And black has absolutely no problem here. Very comfortable play. So g3 is really harmless. Then what else? Bishop c4, yeah, bishop g7, castles. Yeah, this system is playable. Castle. Actually, maybe white can try, I mean, to fight for a small advantage. But all in all, if white is playing short castle, bishop on g7 is actually maybe better than on e7. I mean, if black plays e6, bishop e7. It's more active, and I wouldn't worry too much, even if white is sometimes playing bishop b3, knight c6, h3, followed by bishop e3 is one of the possible options. Another is, let's say, rook e1, knight c6, h3. Maybe it would lead to transposition. Game can proceed in this fashion. Bishop b3. So white is trying to develop, and one day to try to play positional chess with knight d5, but that is... yeah, I wouldn't be worried at all with black. For instance, you can take, maybe b5 is fine, or you can say, you can play bishop c6, queen d3, knight d7. Very normal Sicilian. Yeah, I don't see any reason why black would be worried here. So bishop c4 playable, but no more than that, in my opinion. Then bishop e2. Yeah, a very classical way of playing, followed by castle, bishop e3, knight c6. But also, again, it's playable for white, but doesn't really represent any serious danger, I believe. I would definitely play dragon every day if white would go for this system, because it's a good Sicilian for black. Let's say if queen d2 makes sense, but here maybe other moves are also possible just to play, like a6, but I think d5 simply equalizes here. After e d5, knight d5. Now actually after knight takes d5, the simplest equality is knight d4, and then everything starts to change. After bishop d4, queen d5 just leads to a very drawish position. Or knight takes c6, b takes c6, let's say rook fd1, queen c7, black easily equalizes here. It's, well, probably will end up in massive exchanges and draw this position. So f4 is actually simply not good, because queen b6. In any case, f4 is not always so good for white already with the bishop on g7. So you can always just play bishop d7, but actually here, according to engines, queen b6 is a strong move, and white starts to be in trouble here. So that's why the main move for white is to play knight b3 here, but, well, you know, very often in many Sicilian you've seen already that actually black is playing queen b6, knight b3, queen c7, trying to remove this knight from the center. So if white has only chance to fight for an advantage is to play like this, knight b3, then it probably means that, well, there's nothing, there shouldn't be anything special. So black here can play, there is one system, bishop e6, let's say 4 rook c8, and so on, very typical play, more or less equal. Or you can start with a6, also you want to play b5, after a4, bishop e6. Well, all in all, absolutely harmless, I believe. There is a lot of theory, of course, because many players, they feel they're not very well prepared, or they forgot all the main lines, because you need also with white to remember quite a lot there, and then they just play this just to play. I also a couple of times just didn't want to enter main dragon, because I felt I don't remember really my notes my analysis and was playing just positional chess like this, but wouldn't get anything. No, I was trying sometimes to play this system with rook e1, also a possible setup like this, knight b3, then followed by bishop f1. I even got a bit of a plus against in rapid chess against Levon Aranyan once, and was even close to winning at some point, but objectively it's nothing. I remember another game, classical chess, I played against Rauf Mamedov. He played very well. He played a6 and so on, and bishop f1, b5 if I remember correctly, and I just got totally nothing out of the opening. It was even worse at some point. So all in all, no, of course white is not worse here, but in general, yeah, that shouldn't worry you if you play dragon. But bishop e3 is another story. Yeah? If you have bishop e3, definitely, absolutely definitely the best system for white here. Bishop g7, and now f3. Well, maybe you can start with queen d2, because it's not quite clear if knight g4 is good enough for equality, because bishop g5 and knight c6, knight b3, well, white has some chances for an advantage here, but in any case, after knight c6, knight g4 is already a threat, and then white has nothing better than playing f3, and then, of course, most of the players obviously start with f3, just not to give an additional option for black. There is a system bishop e2, knight c6, queen d2, but again, also I don't think it's seriously dangerous. Castles and long castle. Well, there is some sense in having bishop on e2 instead of pawn on f3, because now white maybe have more attacking chances after h4. Still, it looks a bit strange. Yeah? f3 is much more harmonious and natural. First of all, I have a feeling that actually d5 might just equalize in this position. At least engines cannot find anything substantial for white. For example, just gives one of the possible lines is bishop f3. And now black has a trick d4, knight takes c6, queen c7. Actually quite a nice trick, because he will actually take back the piece, knight takes c4, bc, and well, maybe white is nominally slightly better, but it's pretty, black should be fine here. But even if not that, knight g4 is also okay, I believe. Bishop takes g4, bishop takes g4, f3, and now bishop e6, that is important move. Otherwise, if black bishop goes to d7, then white can really start his quick attack with h4, can be dangerous. Here, bishop is much more active. Black wants to play queen a5, so this or that way usually it gets to this position, queen a5. And even if white's attack seemingly is very dangerous, but actually engines are perfectly happy with black's position, even playing in the most, arrogant way, I would say, just ignoring white's attack. Not the only way to play, but actually computer best is just playing like this, knight f5, hg, hg. Doesn't care about check on h6, because king goes to f7, then can go to d7 via e8. And actually you really shouldn't underestimate black's counterattack. White's king is also in danger. Black, by the way, wants to play rook h8, so all in all, this position is equal. Black is fine in this system. That's why f3, knight c6, sooner or later, queen d2, castles. Well, there was some, I think, Sergei Tivyakov, he was a dragon player for many years, in our childhood. We are from the same generation, more or less. And but of course, it was a little bit different times. There were no engines, so it was much more difficult for white to fight for advantage in dragon. So he played it all his life, and at some point when engines started to appear already and started to pose more and more problems for black, he tried few times this system, just playing h5, long castle, bishop d7. So trying to play with the king on the center for the moment, but yes, I just don't believe in it. Yeah, I mean, black doesn't really have any serious counterplay yet. So playing h5 and then, making moves like rook c8, bishop e6. Yeah, I never really trusted this system, and actually nowadays engines are giving +1 for white just in a positional play. Bishop c4, for instance, or king b1, rook c8, knight b3 also is quite good. I mean, really good according to nowadays engines. Let's say bishop e6, knight d5, and white just enjoying a nice considerable advantage without actually too much risk. What I want to also to explain again about neither, that it's the pluses of white's position is not only eventual attack on the king side, but actually white is very solid in the center. So in fact, it's not necessary in dragon when you are playing white is to try to mate as soon as possible. Not really, because actually it's not easy for black to develop his counterplay, because white actually has more control in the center. Basically, he controls the d4 square, more or less d5 square and e4 square, and black only has a control of e5 square. So white's main advantage is actually very, very strong central position. So that's why all these plays like h5, bishop d7, slow play, I find it hard to believe. So I believe black should normally castle. And here black has three major moves. One is g4. It's nowadays it's out of fashion already, but it's also quite a dangerous move. So the idea is that after long castle, a second popular move, now black is playing d5. This is the main line, and I will show you it now. So the idea of g4 is to try to stop d5, because d5, g5 obviously comes. And then to long castle, h4, and so on. So white is just trying to stop d5. But a dangerous move, but actually probably black is in time to equalize here by playing bishop e6. I believe it's really the best move for black, because let's say if you start with knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop e6, now h4 is already very serious. So white can start his attack, direct attack, doesn't even need to castle first, so he just wants h5. And d5, e5, always possible. So, and after h5, even knight d5, for instance, computer gives already a very serious advantage to white. So you see, actually, if you want to play dragon with black, you need to know exactly what you are doing, because you cannot play this variation without a considerable amount of very precise opening knowledge. One wrong move and you end up just under very direct and very often mating attack. So let's say after g4, bishop e6 is practically a must, in my opinion, to not to get much worse out of the opening, because now in case of, let's say, h4, already d5 works, and this seems to be okay for black. Knight takes e6 is possible, but it seems that it's pretty dangerous, but with the precise moves, knight e5, bishop e2, probably queen c8 is the best here. And the position is also not clear. After h4, for instance, knight fd7, I think is the main move here. And black just in time to create his counterplay here, so black is fine. So that's why after bishop e6, long castle. And now already knight takes d4. It's quite important that black forced white to play long castle. I mean, not that it's a bad move, but just that white is not in time already to mate directly black with h4, h5. And dragon is a variation of one tempi. One little tempi, here or there, totally changes everything. So a3, rook fc8. Even though Karpov liked to play this system when he was young, and because white can always get into endgame here, playing h4, like let's say rook b8 is the main line here. Now there are lots of force variations after h5, b5, and very, very direct lines, but it seems it used to be considered as a draw, this variation, and now I've checked it with modern engines, it also seems to show that it's a draw. I mean, at the end of the very sharp play. So black is okay here. That's why white is trying normally to play knight d5 and trying to pretend he's a little bit better in this endgame. I think Anatoly Karpov even won one or two endgames like that. But it's not much anyways. And nowadays engines, they found a very, very nice resource, b5 here. Not an easy move to play over the board, because just white to give up a pawn, but the idea is that black is very quickly organizing counterplay. So let's say if king b1, a5, and then b4 and so on, and black is in time to organize his play. And after bishop takes a7, after bishop takes a7, he has rook a8 and bishop d4, b4, this tactical resource. And then taking back the pawn, and black is in time. But in any case, even if not b5, white doesn't really have a serious advantage, just a little bit more comfortable endgame. So it seems that g4 is not so dangerous. I mean, even though maybe white can still search for some ideas, I mean, not that I'm 100% sure. In this dragon, you cannot be 100% sure anyways, but it seems that it's holding so far. Then the main line is bishop c4, but very unpleasant move is also long castle, and that is quite annoying for, I believe, for dragon players, because so with white I can recommend you, well, both bishop c4 is also a good move, but also long castle depends. Long castle is simpler to learn. I believe it's more positional. So bishop c4 maybe is more, I would say, aggressive. It's really like you're trying to win by force with bishop c4. Long castle, you give black chances to get a slightly worse position and probably defendable, but it's not really what usually black wants to do if he's playing dragon variation. But I'm not also sure if black has anything better than that. So let's cancel. Long castle is definitely, if you play dragon with black, you need to know exactly what you are doing against it, what system you play, because here black doesn't have too much choice. I believe d5 should be played, because otherwise, well, white just wants to go g4, h4, and so on. So if you are playing this system with knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop e6, now king b1 is a very unpleasant move, because it stops queen a5, because queen a5, knight d5, and here knight takes e7 check, yeah, rook takes d2, so you are not in time anymore to play queen a5. That's why the main move now is queen c7 for black in the series. So black actually is like losing tempi, then playing rook fc8, and only after that queen a5, which is of course a very serious tempi. And here white has, well, quite a number of interesting moves, even very strange, but knight b5, very positional way of playing, also I quite like for white. So let's say queen c6, bishop e3, maybe trying to go knight d4. I doubt black has equality here, so this is a simple way of playing. I mean, the g4 is the most direct way, rook fc8, h4, queen a5, and now again, if a3, rook b8, h5, b5, even with a king on b1, it might still be holdable. Anyways, it's compared to g4 system, white is just tempi up here. But there is quite unpleasant move queen g5. After that, well, there is a choice for black, is just to go into this quite sad endgame, slightly worse, because of the h line, and well, black has to defend here, trying to make a draw, or maybe for real dragon players is to try to play b5 here to sacrifice the pawn. And let's say queen b5, queen c7, queen a4, rook a b8. Again, I'm not quite sure black has enough counterplay objectively, compensation for the pawn, but well, it's always easier to play against the king, yeah. So maybe in a practical sense here, it's not so easy for white to play. But first of all, this, as I've already mentioned, this knight b5 move is quite unpleasant, but also h4. I believe maybe h4 is very unpleasant for black, because if rook c8, then white can just play h5, and he doesn't lose time playing g4, and here black is in trouble. And the typical reaction against h4 is h5, but nowadays engines start just to show that g4, hg, h5 is extremely dangerous for black, maybe even almost winning for white. So I don't know, knight d4, this position king b1 doesn't seem to be doing well for black. That's why, otherwise, okay, if black just plays this bishop d7, then white gets fantastic version, let's say g4, h4, because he doesn't, the only idea why white is, instead of long castle, trying to play bishop c4 is to stop d5. So if black doesn't play d5, then of course white is much better off with a bishop on f1. So this position, rook c8, king b1, h4, whatever, yeah, this looks like let's say king b1, always useful move, and white is simply much better here, so this is practically not playable for black in my opinion. Therefore, it seems that, well, want it or not, but d5 has to be played if black wants to get a decent position. And here white has quite a number of choices. There are some moves, king b1, for instance, knight takes d4. Believe me or not, but rook b8 is actually maybe not too bad also. But knight takes d4 is the main line, e5, knight f5. Yeah, e5 is a nice move, by the way. Knight f5, ef6, ef6, knight d5, knight e3, queen e3. And for instance, this position is maybe a little bit more comfortable for white, but it seems that black in general holds here. So king b1 is one try, queen e1 is another possible try, but again, here after e5, probably the best move, e5, knight is bc6, ed5, now cd5, bishop g5. I'm not sure if black has enough here to equalize, but after knight takes d5, bishop c4, bishop e6, let's say knight e4, I don't know, bishop c5, then queen goes to c7, let's say knight e4, queen c7, bishop c5, rook fd8. Hard to say if it's completely equal, but black gets a much better version of the position in the main line after ed5, so probably ed5 is still the best move in this position. Knight takes d5, knight c6, bc6. Now taking the pawn doesn't give white anything. Takes queen c7, and black is fine. Let's say queen c5, queen b7, queen a3, bishop f5. And well, even if it's objectively equal, I would, well, probably prefer being black here, because white's position is, well, looking unpleasant to play. But what is even more important, that it's objectively fine for black. So bishop d4 is definitely the best move, and now black has a difficult choice actually. A choice of playing e5, which is very much more in the dragon style than other moves, but probably objectively it's pretty much better for white. Even though the game is quite complicated and can get very sharp. Or other moves, knight takes e3, bishop d4, is more trying to equalize, to play for a draw with very few winning chances, being probably slightly worse, but with good chances to equalize. From one point of view, yeah, difficult choice, because of course you don't play dragon to try to just to equalize, to make a draw in a slightly inferior endgame, let's say. But also you don't play dragon to get plus minus, to get much worse position. So here, well, e5, let's say, let's consider first the real dragon play. Bishop c5, bishop e6. Actually, black is not worried about bishop takes f8, queen takes f8, because he gets a lot of counterplay with black on the black squares. But usually white is just playing knight e4. Well, at some point, let's say if black is playing queen c7, then white would definitely take already on f8. Yeah, so black probably should go rook e8. He can start with rook b8 maybe, but after bishop c4 probably rook e8 will be played anyway. So rook e8, and this position, I think the best move is probably h4 here. So white is starting, well, he wants just to attack with h5, also covering the g5 square. I mean, bishop c4 possible, queen c7. h4 usually, and in general white has a lot of control in the center. Of course the knight on d5 is powerful, but white also has a very nice c5 square. The knight on e4 is difficult to get rid of this knight, and actually a lot of control on the position. So engines are given here quite a considerable plus for white. But again, you can study this position, it's pretty complicated still, even though I have no doubt it's objectively in white's favor. But again, not all of you are playing in the top tournaments, not always playing classical time control, so otherwise it can be playable. If you study this position carefully, because I don't advise you just to play it. Yeah? It's easy to lose with black quickly. Because here there are two options. Well, h5 has to be stopped probably, so whether you can play h5, but that's not so popular because the square on g5, yeah, after bishop c4, actually engines are showing knight f4 is the best move, but this is very sad, just going into a worse endgame, trying to hold the draw there. But again, if queen c7, then already g4 probably is very strong, just starting an attack. Well, that's why most of players are playing h6. And now, yeah, I don't know, bishop c4 quite often is playing, but I quite like a very simple way of playing h5. You can also probably start with g4, but h5 is what computers recommend. g5, g4, simply like this. So now you have the f5 square. True, black has f4 square in return, but at least there is no f5, so the knight on f4 is secured. Queen c7, bishop c4, and here there is still a lot of theory in this position. And actually, statistics it's more or less okay for black. It's not too bad, even though the engines are assessing it, well, like almost +1, I think, here. But strategically, black's position is, of course, well, pretty bad, frankly. It's just that he might try to get some practical chances against the king. So again, it's not so easy for white also to play well here, and to let's say to change queens would be an ideal scenario, but not so easy. But frankly, I don't really believe that this position can be objectively fine, for black. So okay, e5 is playable, but probably worse. Otherwise, black has to go to some slightly inferior positions, like knight takes e3. Here, even bishop takes e3 actually is quite annoying, I believe. Queen d2, bishop d2, and this endgame is still not equal because white has better pawn structure and the king closer to the queen side, so black still has to work for a draw here. But also queen takes e3 is also very pleasant for white. Bishop h6 check is played now. Well, have to play bishop e3 because, of course, king b1 is bad because of e5 and the pin on the line. So bishop e3 now taken on e3, queen b6, and here, well, you see in all those positions, if black doesn't play e5, then white simply has a somewhat better pawn structure. Black's king is safe, so he's not probably going to get mated. But then it's more about a positional play where white is, with actually no risk, trying to squeeze his slight positional advantage. After queen b6, actually queen takes e7, bishop e6, queen a3 is not quite sure that black has completely enough compensation for the pawn here. But I like, if I was white, I would maybe play rook e1, very simple, bishop e6, and now, of course, I don't want to exchange on b6 to improve black's pawn structure, but I think h4 is quite nice, and let's say rook fd8, h5, and in order not to get mated, on the h line, black will, well, sooner than later exchange queens on a3, and, well, white has some ideas, hg, rook h4 after the queens are changed. So very nice, pleasant plus in the endgame. Black is suffering with the chances to make a draw, but no guarantee at all. So knight c3 is pretty sad move. e5 is sad in its own way, but bishop takes d4 is maybe relatively best. Queen takes d4, queen b6, and now knight a4 is the main line. Actually, there are some other moves. White is always a little better, but I think knight a4 is probably the best. Queen c7, and now let's say knight c5 move, or bishop c4, or let's say knight c5, rook d8, bishop c4. There is quite a long series still here. Black was trying, I mean, frankly, between us, no way black can be completely equal here, but it's not that much for white, not too much. Of course, white has a nice structure, the knight on c5, bishop on c4, but the knight on d5 is very important, for black. It holds the position together. But again, you can study this theory here. Good chances for black to finally to make a draw, but the question is only about will he manage a draw or not, so there is not so many winning chances here. So that is the state of affairs of the long castle. Nothing too dramatic for black, as you can see, but quite unpleasant, and the choice is quite limited for black here. So again, you need to study carefully whether you play those positions with a pawn on c6, a7, taking, without e5. Then you have really to study deeply and to know for sure how you're going to equalize it, to make a draw at the end. Or you play e5 and you need to analyze this position to make sure your position is not going to collapse soon. So to get the understanding of those difficult but still rather tensed positions for black. So lone castle is kind of a problem for black, in my opinion, against dragon. If it was only problem, that wouldn't be the worst. But actually, the bad news that bishop c4 is also a very, very serious move. And now we are going to consider the theory after bishop c4, which probably can be called the main move in this position. So bishop c4 is the most popular move, the biggest amount of games here. And of course, it was actually a lot of fun. Pre-computer era, to analyze it, to find new ideas, a lot of interesting variations. Now it's getting less and less funny for black because many of those variations are already practically refuted by computers, so there are, very few left which are playable, in my opinion. There are some, even the idea knight d7, for instance, was quite popular in the 60s, 70s, trying to get the knights into the attack, knight b6, knight a5, to jump with knights. First of all, there is h4 move, again, trying to make economy on castle, trying to attack immediately, quite dangerous as well, but lone castle is good enough, because here after knight b6, bishop b3, engines for some reason like bishop e2 here also, but even the old theory is quite unpleasant for black. Bishop b3, knight a5, and now queen d3. Black is lost quite some time and also removed his knight from the defensive position on f6. So, and in case of knight takes b3, of course you take with a c pawn, because if ab, a5, a4, black might get some counterplay on the a file, but it's very typical maneuver for Sicilian. Quite often it works when bishop on b3 is taken with a knight, you take with a pawn, let's say bishop d7, king b1, now the white's king is very safe, and he just starts his attack on the king side. So normally bishop d7 is played, or I would rather say was played, because this line is not, haven't seen it for quite a while in tournament practice, because it seems that black's position after h4, rook c8, and now even simple h5, knight bc4, king b1. So white just even giving up both bishops, but he still has attack, followed by g4, and actually black, let's be frank, didn't really manage to organize any serious counterplay, and white is already, almost mating, so this variation is practically refuted, knight d7. Then bishop d7 is played, usually lone castle. Again, it's more precise than bishop b3, because this position, by the way, we have checked already. We have the e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, g6 move order. In that variation, bishop was already on b3 here, and that makes a difference, because here black has this system, takes on b5, and it seems to be doing fine for black. But that's why white should play lone castle here, not bishop b3, but start with lone castle. And here black have tried almost all reasonable attempts to organize counterplay. So let's check it one by one. Queen b8 is quite a original way of organizing counterplay. Actually makes sense, because you want to play rook c8 and then to push pawns on the queen side, but as most of the time happens in dragon, black is just one tempo not in time. Here h4, rook c8 is played, bishop b3. Now black probably doesn't really have time for h5 anymore, even because of g4, and it seems that after hg, h5, probably it will not end well for black. Even if, of course, white has other ways of playing. It's always nice to play king b1. Will never be a bad move, king b1 also. But usually black is trying very quickly to organize counterplay with a5, but a4, and now takes b5, and very strong move knight d5, and black is in trouble here. So not in time, queen b8. Then what else? Knight e5 is not a great move fodder. Bishop b3, queen a5. Well, you should probably play rook c8 here, but this we will consider via the rook c8 move fodder. Here, in my opinion, king b1, and not only in my opinion, but in the opinion of most of players, king b1 is posing quite serious problems for black. But if you play queen a5, then, well, at minimum, white can play king b1 or h4, and black will have to play rook fc8 to transpose to the line we are going to consider next. But here, in this move order, white can already even play bishop h6, and with very considerable advantage here, king b1. And then you start attacking the king. So if you already want to play system with queen a5, you better play queen a5 here. Start with queen a5, bishop b3, rook fc8. It's a, well, big theoretical position. I wouldn't say it's totally refuted, but it used to be the main line of Dragon for a long time. But I see that there are two systems which are quite unpleasant for black, especially king b1 move. h4, h5 is not that bad. If white includes h4, h5, king b1, knight e5, well, basically black's only counterplay is knight e5, and yeah, trying to get knight c4. Sometimes rook takes c3, exchange sacrifice. For instance, if bishop h6, now already black can take on c3. And black has enough counterplay here in this position. So after knight e5, white's best move is bishop g5, according to theory. Now black has quite a number of moves, but it seems that nothing really works than rook c5. It's supposed to be the best move. And, well, the main idea is that after f4, black has a very important knight g4, very nice square for the knight on g4, and I will explain you why after king b1 it's already a different story. But here f4 doesn't work so well, but bishop takes f6 is the main theoretical move, and now black's best is to take knight d5 and probably rook takes d5, because otherwise, if queen takes d2, knight takes f6 check, king g7, then white has a very important knight takes h5 check, and then only rook takes d2, just, well, being a pawn up and the winning endgame. So otherwise here black can always play ef, but after rook d2 it's clear that due to the better pawn structure, white is just having a serious advantage in this endgame. So that's why black's idea here is to take on d5, bishop takes d5, queen b6. This kind of positional exchange sacrifice, let's say c3, rook c8, then black wants to get a5, a4. Engines are given a serious plus for white here, and I'm sure that objectively white is probably better, but it's not easy to play. Black has his play. It's, well, it's difficult to mate black, for instance, after g4, black can always take an h5, g5, and his king is rather safe. And he gets some counterplay, so that might be playable, let's say, in a practical sense, at least for black. But I personally was planning, when studying this with white, I wanted to play king b1, knight e5 again, and now bishop g5 without h4, h5, because the difference is that in case of rook c5, f4 already works. And after knight g4, of course, white can always play h3, simply attacking the knight. So black has to, after f4, has probably to go to c6, because knight c4 seems not to work. Take e5, and black's position starts to collapse tactically. As you see, it's not only, as I mentioned already, the problem is not only the king side, but pretty often the center. So white is just breaking through in the center. And here it works tactically, because after d, knight b3, attacking the queen, then you take on f6, and white is winning a piece on bishop on d7. So after f4, knight c6 has to be played, and, well, black's position with the strange rook on c5 is very shaky, but there is no direct win or anything for white in this position. But let's say there is quite, well, a number of choices, quite dangerous actually, number of dangerous moves. For instance, computer shows such variation. e5, and now black's only way is d5, bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, knight b3. Seems that black is just losing, but he has knight e4 tactics. So again, it shows how important it is to know, the variations move per move in Dragon. And after knight e4, it seems that black is somehow managing to hold in this position. Takes rook c4 miraculously, rook d7, rook e4. And according to engine, black should be in time to make a draw here. But let's say bishop takes f6 is still pretty unpleasant. Bishop f6, e5. Now the only reasonable move is bishop g7, because d5 now already simply losing. So bishop g7 and, for example, knight d2 move. Also knight f3 is quite dangerous as well. But knight d2 and white, probably the best move is bishop f5, ed, for instance, h3, then followed by g4. Actually, white has quite a lot of control of his queen side, so black cannot really organize any serious attack there. So rook d8, g4, well, black is suffering, but it's not too bad for black. But in any case, it's, again, like many other lines in Dragon, they are not refuted, but with best play, black quite often ends up just in a very unpleasant position, defending a slightly inferior endgame, for example. If white knows theory well. Another option, by the way, is after bishop g5 to play knight c4, and here also the white needs really to know what he is doing. But after takes and knight b3, well, unfortunately for black, he has to put the queen on e5, because again, if queen a6, for instance, e5 is a real problem. So after queen e5, now probably white's best move is rook e1, is threatening bishop f4, e5, so again, breaking through in the center, or f4, e5 sometimes. So black should take on c3. I have my doubts after bc3, black has enough counterplay here, but at least there is some play. Bishop f4 is also quite annoying move according to engines. And now, for instance, after rook c2, king c2, queen b5, king b1, black has a pawn for exchange bishop and pawn against rook, but white has a strong control in the center, and in general a better position. Black doesn't have enough counterplay. So queen a5 is not refuted, but not also equalizing probably. Then another quite interesting move is rook b8. Actually, it's maybe even objectively the best line for black, even though, as you will see in the main variation, its position is, not very pleasant, but maybe holdable. So after rook b8, engines are showing some strange way of playing. For instance, king b1, takes b5. That is black's idea, of course, to start pushing pawn. And now, don't laugh, but bishop f1 is supposed to be the main move. Don't ask me why. I suspect the idea is to leave the e2 square for the knight. For instance, after e6, g4, and after b4, now white has knight e2 move. And then continuing his play on the king side, but it's definitely not a refutation. I mean, black has his play as well. The main move is bishop b3, and now the point is that black is not in time anymore to play neither knight e5, because first of all bishop h6 is very serious, but also simply f4 already, knight g4, and even h3 takes, and again white is just threatening e5 and e6 and breaking through in the center. White is better. Neither knight takes d4 is working anymore, because takes b5. Now white can already take on a7, and here black doesn't have enough compensation for the pawn. But knight a5 is what usually is played here. Now in case of h4 b5, h5 knight c4 takes, this position is not so simple. I remember, I think in this line there was a game Grishuk against Mamedov, classical chess, and actually Mamedov played extremely well and outplayed and had a winning position against Grishuk, but didn't manage to win finally. But so this position might be not so clear. But I always thought that bishop h6 is unpleasant enough move, because now b5, well, black has to organize some counterplay here, and takes knight d5. A very simple way of treating this position with white. Yeah, black tried different things here, always finally being slightly worse, defending some unpleasant positions. According to engine, knight c4, strangely enough, is the best try. Takes, because this position, for instance, knight f6, is playing queen b6 here. Queen c3, ef6. And this looks pretty bad strategically, but somehow rook b7, rook b8, he comes, and even though still gives a certain plus for white, but more or less holdable. This position may be holdable. So again, maybe knight e2 is more principal way of playing, and yeah, some kind of position like this, king g8, rook e1, queen b6, queen c3, rook b7, and knight d4, bishop a4. Again, probably white is definitely pressing. I mean, black is, don't be too optimistic about this b line, because the best black can manage very often is just to take and to get some endgame. White will take on e7. White also has b3 resource pretty often. I mean, white is not really getting mated here, but at least, well, engines are not too depressed about black's position, gives a bit of advantage to white, but maybe it's holdable variation. So pay attention to this line. It might be not too bad. But the main move is rook c8 here. Or you can start with knight e5, bishop b3, rook c8 if you play knight e5. But I want to recommend you another variation after rook c8. Bishop b3. The only thing of the rook c8 move order that white has quite an interesting knight takes e6 move, which is very rarely played. Bishop takes e6 is by far the best according to engines, and bishop b3. And actually, again, the idea is that after b5, bishop takes a7, before knight d5, actually bishop is not very well placed on c6. It's much better placed on d7. And here white is better. Black doesn't have enough for the pawn. But so black's best is to play a5 here, and after a4, queen e8. A strange play, trying to get knight d7, knight c5, but well, maybe not too bad. Maybe it can hold, because, for instance, bishop h6 is a very serious direct move. But this variation takes b5, h4, be, bishop a2, almost mate with h5, but actually king h8, and it's quite difficult to mate for white, and black has his counterplay already, so it's probably this a5, a4, queen a8, maybe queen e2 according to engine is the best move. Maybe white can be a bit better, but it's playable for black. Anyway, knight takes e6 might be an option for white players, because after bishop b3, which is the main move, here I believe that the best system actually is knight takes d4. The much more popular move is knight e5 in this position, but I think it's in serious crisis, this variation. Well, I think king b1 is the best move. There are many other ways of playing, again, h4, bishop h6, but everywhere, if bishop h6, as you already know, taking on c3 is not so clear in typical resource when the queen is already on h6. But again, I think after king b1, black has, well, quite considerable problems. So, and most of best players nowadays are playing king b1 here. Now knight c4 takes g4 is really better for white. White just starts h4, starts his attack, and after queen a5, well, has various, even g5 is actually very good. Knight h5, knight d5, let's say queen d8, knight e2, then followed by knight g3. Sometimes, again, you have to solve this issue with a knight on h5. Seems to be better for white, but also knight b3 is even more. Instead of g5, knight b3 is also very dangerous. Queen a6, bishop h6. Now take on h6 and take on c3 is already not enough in this particular position, because while black will be taking the pawn, he'll probably get mated with h4, h5. Also e5, d, g5 probably threatening, so that is not enough. Probably rook f c8, and now takes h4. well, black's main resource in those positions is taken on c3, but again, I don't think it will be enough. White's attack is very strong. So knight c4 I wouldn't recommend you. White is probably better here in several ways. So the best move is probably rook e8. Here, very strange move, but at least probably the idea is after bishop h6, black quite often can play bishop h8 and kind of making a useful move, preparing maybe queen a5, because again, black's problem is that if this rook is on c8, queen a5, always knight d5 works. Queen d2, knight takes e7 check, and rook takes d2. So with the rook e8 move, black is trying to prepare knight d5. And here, well, I think white is probably better in few ways. Computer likes even the move h3 for some reason, probably trying to get f4. I don't find it very logical. Quite a sensible move is rook e1, just trying to play in the center, maybe for f4, e5. If g4, then b5 is already not so clear, because now with the move g4, you weaken the f3 pawn. So after knight takes b5, black can take on f3. That's why the best move is probably h4. Black has to play h5, otherwise he will get mated quickly. And now, yeah, there is a long theory here. I mean, first of all, bishop h4 is quite dangerous also here. But then knight c4. Here, knight c4, this position g4, hg, for instance, h5, rook h8, hg, fg, and as dangerous as it looks, but it seems that white doesn't have more than draw in all variations, even though, of course, it's easier to play with white, but it seems that black holds here. But actually, the dangerous move is g4, and it might be actually a refutation, hg, h5. There is no direct mate, variations are complicated here. So again, yeah, if you play with black, well, if you think that your opponent doesn't know so well theory here, of course, quite a number of variations are playable, because white needs to be also very precise. But if white knows all the theory, then you have to take care, yeah, because, for instance, this variation, knight takes h5, bishop h6. Actually, rook dg1 is also an interesting move. Bishop h6, and there is a lot of theory still here, but it seems that white's attack is very strong, and even there were many engine games here. Finally, also, that is quite bad news, because black is 2 pawns up, and if engines cannot often hold this position, probably means that the position is really dangerous. For instance, one of the main lines here is king h7, takes, fg, bishop takes g4, knight f5 check, bishop f5, very forced play, ef5, rook h8, fg, knight takes g6. This position, and now white can, for instance, can continue to play for attack. Rook hg1, by the way, there were even very strong human players games in this position. Or can play queen d5, e6, queen d4 check, now taken on a7, and actually then engines are taken on b7. Finally, with equal material, white is better because his king is safer, but it's not lost. I mean, black can defend this position. So you see, well, here, of course, but also the problem that white is not forced to play this h4, this very direct line. He can play all other moves, yeah, as I've mentioned already. But again, rook e8 is probably the best move, and this position is playable. This variation is not refuted yet, at least, completely. So knight e5, well, the problem is that you need to know a lot of theory. One incorrect move, you resign practically with black. But if you study it well, if you know it, if you study carefully, you remember all the lines, it might be playable. Knight e5. But actually, knight takes d4, this variation, bishop takes d4, b5, is doing more or less okay. Because it's pretty direct. Black just wants to get a5 and so on. So now, for example, what are the variation? Bishop takes a7. Here, black has quite serious counterplay. b4, if knight e2, queen a5 followed by bishop a4, black has good play. So, and if knight d5, again, you take, play queen a5 and bishop a4, and it seems that black has enough counterplay. By the way, in this line, there were a lot of computer games, so It's pretty direct, but it's also very well checked with engines, with very powerful engines. So probably the best what white has here is playing knight d5. The other variations are, for instance, h4, a5, h5, a4. Very direct play, bishop f6, bishop takes f6. Actually, maybe ef is also holdable, but bishop f6, main line, hg, e6. And, well, computer says that it's a forced draw. Don't ask me why. After e5, bishop g7 is the best move. So you see, you better learn it by heart, those lines. And, okay, at the end of the day, computer shows some kind of forced draw here, some perpetual. So this is one line, but normally knight d5 is played. And now also it's quite direct. Knight takes d5, takes, e d5. Okay, white is positionally better, because if he just gets a bit of time, he'll organize a pressure on the e7 pawn and get an advantage. But black has to be very quick. a5, a3. Now king g8 is the best move by far. Rook e1. Because h4, white sometimes trying to organize attack, but black is again just in time here. Bishop f5, and by the way, he's threatening bishop takes c2, bishop takes c2, b3. Also queen a5 is threatening, so here black has enough counterplay. And very important, after hg, there is always bishop takes g6, protecting the king. So king g8, rook h1. Now the best move, rook c5, very important. Rook e3, again the best move for white. So white is trying to attack the e7 pawn. And now b4. Almost only move if black wants to get a decent position, because queen a8, actually even engines not immediately realize that it's bad, because first engine shows that queen a8 is a very decent move. Rook takes e7, bishop f5, g4, a4. And then suddenly they realize that after gf, ab, c3, the plant b4 is actually losing because of f6, and white is first mating with the threat of queen h6. And after queen c8, very strong move, queen d3, and here black is, well, in big trouble. Therefore, b4 is the best move. Again, yeah, you see, it's very computerish play here. You really need to know a lot of theory, a lot of variations, but don't be worried if you are black. White also needs to know a lot, yeah, here. The only difference that most of the time, if white confuses something or forgets something, he probably will not get worse. And if black forgets something or is not well enough prepared, he might simply lose the game. So that's a small difference. But after b4, maybe black has enough counterplay actually, because a4, queen e8, again, very important, black has practically only moves, not to get much worse. But after queen e8, queen e2, bishop a4, rook e7, queen e7, this tactics works. Takes, and rook fc8, and it seems that black is fine here. Enough compensation for the queen. Therefore, after b4, ab is played, ab, queen takes b4, queen a8. Actually, a very important opening position in this line, and now it was considered to be completely fine for black before. Let's say after king d2, rook b8, queen d4, bishop f5. Okay, white wants to remove, to run with his king somewhere to f2, g1, and just to be a pawn up, but on the way there are lots of dangers. So it seems that black is in time here to have enough, black has enough play. But then engines found bishop c4 move, which is very tricky, because the idea is that after rook b8, white has rook a3 move, and white is just pawn up in the endgame. Also, of course, check on a1 gives nothing, king d2. So after bishop c4, well, black starts to play just positionally. Bishop f5, let's say rook a3, queen c8, b3, queen c7. And here, well, there are no direct threats. White, I think engines are given plus 0.4 for white, 0.5. So it's a long game. Black has a long-term compensation. Maybe objectively not enough. I would say that black is fighting for a draw here objectively, but in a practical game you can also win, because white's king is in a certain danger. So yeah, it's probably a position to to analyze for you if you are a professional chess player. on a quite high level, but this is the most important probably position of this knight takes d4 variation. So that is a theory of, the structure of dragon. I think I gave it quite detail. Of course, there are still some other lines. If you want to study it, you need to go deeper. What can I say? Objectively, again, I would repeat that I believe white should be better objectively, but well, it's quite a rare guest nowadays, dragon, and if you study it with black well, if you analyze it well, especially if you're a club player, for instance, or you're playing blitz and you remember the lines, it's not easy for white also. White needs to know quite a lot here to pretend, for opening advantage. The play is quite sharp. The price of a move of each move, so to say, is high. So definitely a playable system for, I would say, for any level up to 2,400, 2,500. Then it becomes, players are strong, very well prepared, and it starts to be very, very risky to play dragon. But I think now you are definitely ready with white on any level, even on 2,700. You can already play it with white just after listening to this material. And with black, if you're a club player, amateur player, you can play it, maybe spend a bit of time more checking the main positions which I've mentioned, but definitely you can give it a try, and it's quite interesting, entertaining opening. So good luck playing it with black. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Interesting positions, and if you are better prepared, you might win quite a number of games also in this opening.